I'm Kelsey Hubbard, joined again by Mary Anastasia O'Grady, who writes the Americas column for the Wall Street Journal. Mary, you recently got back from Peru. You were down in Iquitos, which is sort of the jungle area. And when you really look at Peru overall, the economy has been growing, but not uniformly. The growth hasn't been throughout. So what's going on there?
That's right, Kelsey. In fact, when you go to Iquitos, you kind of feel like you're 30 years back in time. Things haven't changed there a whole lot. But in Lima, the economy is booming, and this is one of the big challenges for President Alan Garcia, because he's his model, and he's now considered sort of a champion of democratic capitalism, even though when he was president the last time around in 1990 he was a socialist. But now he's championing, you know, a more free market economy, and in order to maintain the momentum for that politically, he's got to get some of these pockets of the country that aren't growing to come along. But in Lima, you see globally competitive businesses. You see wonderful services as a visitor there. Great restaurants, the hotels work, the phones work, the country works. And that's because there's this process of opening and making the economy more competitive that began in 1990 with Fujimori. Alberto Fujimori was the first president, and that's been happening slowly almost over 2 decades. So we've arrived at a place where, you know, there's a fair amount of wealth being created in the capital and along the coast.
And what about those pockets that aren't really coming along? Why is that?
Well, for example, in Iquitos, when I talked to the president, I asked him, you know, what's the matter with Iquitos? And he said that he thinks it really has to do with property rights, which of course was a problem throughout the country. Going back to 1990, they had confiscated a lot of property and tried to make these socialist co-ops and so forth. And as they've restored property rights, they've attracted investment and they've created wealth. In the Amazon jungle, the best resources there really is the wood, the mahogany and the cedar that's harvested. But there's hardly any property rights there. There's some concessions, but most of the jungle is just, as you would say, the law of the jungle. So he's talking about sort of trying to find a way to establish long-term concessions for people who would harvest the wood, because he knows that if you do that, then there are greater incentives to take care of the forests as opposed to just to strip them and run away.
And as we look at the overall country, is there a struggle between sort of the modernizers and those who sort of don't want to see it modernized? And what kind of a problem does that create?
Well, of course, that's happening all over South America. And, of course, Hugo Chavez is the guy in the black hat who wants to sort of have this socialist authoritarian model. And his greatest allies are in the mountain regions of Peru, which are also, similar to Iquitos, haven't developed quite as rapidly. And there also, there's a problem with property rights, and not as much investment has gone in there. And so it's been slower to develop, and that's the place where he's tending to find more disciples for his kind of thinking. So this is kind of ground zero for the South American continent right now. Chavez badly wants to, you know, take advantage of those poorer pockets to gain popularity for his movement, and the modernizers want to keep going with the model they have. And they're both in a race against time. If Peru keeps growing, Chavez is going to lose more and more traction. On the other hand, if some of these areas are not, don't start to get the benefits of the growth, they're going to be more vulnerable to Chavez's offers.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I've been speaking with Mary Anastasia O'Grady, who writes the Americas column for the Wall Street Journal. I'm Kelsey Hubbard in New York.